air bases, whether it's Iron Dome or air defense battery systems, whether it is artillery positions, perhaps. It's unknown what exactly was being targeted, but the Israeli defense array in the air has intercepted seemingly most of those projectiles. We haven't really had any reports yet of them falling in any sort of open areas. We haven't had reports of damage. There are reports of one injury in the southern part of the country, a 10-year-old child in a Bedouin area. These areas typically do not have these types of bomb shelters or safe rooms that are located in other sorts of Israeli towns and homes that are easily accessible and available. So the Israelis say that while perhaps this part of the evening is over, but the longer game for them is going to be a retaliation. And look, it's still unknown if this part specifically is over. It's unknown if there will be this second and third wave of launches from Iran that was reported that Israeli officials are still perhaps bracing for. But they say, again, that they are prepared for any possible scenario.
All right, Hamda Sloat, live for us there in Tel Aviv. Hamda, thank you. Well, as we mentioned, US President Joe Biden has cut a weekend trip short and has returned to Washington, D.C. to consult with his national security team. Let's bring in Heidi Jo-Castro. She joins us live from Washington, D.C. So we know that security meeting, Heidi, at the White House has already started. Who's in that meeting and what kind of response then are we likely to expect from Washington? I mean, US officials knew this was coming.
Absolutely. And Biden rushed to the White House today prior to the announcement of the rest of the world learning that Iran had launched these drones. So he did have some heads up, and he is continuing to meet with his National Security Council, which includes the U.S. Secretaries of Defense and of State, the director of the CIA, the National Intelligence Director, the National Security Advisor, just a list of who's the top U.S. officials who say they are working in close coordination with their Israeli counterparts in directing the way that the U.S. is supporting Israel's defense against this Iranian attack. And we just got a statement from a senior U.S. defense official saying that the U.S. will continue to shoot down Iranian-launched drones that have been targeting Israel. So a confirmation that the U.S. has indeed been taking down these Iranian drones. Meanwhile, a spokeswoman for the National Security Council, again, used this word we've heard over and over again coming from the Biden White House, ironclad, to describe the level of support that the U.S. has for Israel's security. And though we're not getting much more detail about what assets the U.S. is deploying to take down these drones and other incoming projectiles from Iran, we are getting some clues from a British official saying that British air jets are now replacing some of the U.S. fighters that have been doing counterterrorism work in Iraq and Syria in order to free up those U.S. fighter jets to now support Israel. In total, there are still tens of thousands of U.S. troops who are deployed in this region, I should remind us. And there's another 1,000 U.S. troops that are en route to the coast of Gaza there to build a humanitarian place there, waiting in anticipation for this moment to arrive. Again, we're not exactly clear which assets were used to take down these Iranian drones, but that response continues as we speak. Yeah,
Heidi, let's just go back to President Biden, because there's some speculation that he knew about this attack. What sort of behind-the-scenes diplomatic warnings or intelligence led Biden to believe that the response would be sooner rather than later?
He certainly hinted at that. He said there was intelligence that he knew of but couldn't get into publicly yesterday when he said those words exactly, that this attack would be coming sooner rather than later. And he told Iran at that time, this was about 24 hours ago now, don't do it. Well, obviously, that advice was disregarded by Iran. But behind the scenes, the U.S. has been, over the last 10 days or so, really ramping up diplomatic pressure, trying to avoid this very moment from occurring, using pressure on third-party countries to try to pressure Iran to back down from its threat. But the fact that this is taking place came as a surprise to no one, given that the U.S. had intelligence that this would be occurring and the many clues and the telegraphing that Iran gave that this moment would arrive.
All right, Heidi Jo-Castro live for us there in Washington, D.C. Heidi, thank you. Well, there's been strong reaction from leaders abroad and the region. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, released the following statement on X. He said the EU strongly condemns the unacceptable Iranian attack against Israel. This is an unprecedented escalation and a grave threat to regional security. Well, the UK has been a firm supporter of Israel. The British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has reacted by saying, "I condemn in the strongest terms the Iranian regime's attack against Israel." Iran has once again demonstrated that it's intent on sowing chaos in its own backyard. The UK will continue to stand up for Israel's security and for all our regional partners, including Jordan and Iraq. Alongside our allies, we're urgently working to stabilize the situation and prevent further escalation. No one wants to see more bloodshed. Well, Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, has issued a video statement on X. He says the malicious Zionist regime will be punished. Attacking our consulate is like attacking our soil. The malicious regime has made a wrong move in this case. All right, let's bring in David Darosh. He's an associate professor at the National Defense University. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. David, always good to have you with us, particularly on a night like tonight. Give us first, then, your response to Iran's retaliation against Israel. And how surprised are you, David, that Iran used a direct attack rather than via its proxies?
Extremely response. Honestly, I'm amazed you guys are having me on because I got it exactly wrong. I didn't think they'd do this. I think what it shows is two things. The first thing is we say Iran, but we're really talking about the Revolutionary Guard, which increasingly controls the country, and they are very embarrassed. My assessment is that this is not a move in the strategic interest of Iran unless they're able to effectively deter Israel, but it is directed at restoring the prestige and hurt pride of the Revolutionary Guard, which clearly has been penetrated by Israeli intelligence. I'm also a little concerned that if, the Iranians have made a statement from their UN ambassador saying, okay, this is it, we're done. But if their target selection is viewed by Israel as overly provocative, or if they just manage to kill a large number of Israelis, Israel cannot leave this here. So, we're at a very dangerous moment. And, we're not sure what the Iranian intentions are, but the actions they've done in support of their intentions have the potential for leading to this ratcheting escalatory mechanism.
And David, just talk us through what more we know about these Shahed drones that are in the skies over Israel. Many have been shot down. Their range, their speed, their warheads, their payload, etc.
Well, the payload is, let's start with that. That's the interesting part. So the payload is about 50 kilograms. It's about the size of 2 coffee cans. I've got to handle a few of these. It has copper penetrating plates all around it. It has high explosives, and then it has bits of shrapnel really kind of glued to it in sort of almost an aftermarket looking thing. So it's not really an effective weapon against a hardened military target. It's more of a terror weapon. It's designed the copper plates shoot out penetrating jets. So if it hits some sort of machinery like an electric transformer, it will cause some serious damage. And of course, the shrapnel will create damage to vehicles and especially personnel. But it doesn't have the ability to penetrate. The propeller-driven Shahed is very slow-moving. There is a jet version, and at least one channel is reporting that the jet version is being used. That moves faster, but the big challenge is actually tracking these because most air defense is dependent on radar, and the body of this is fiberglass. It doesn't have much of a radar signature. Paradoxically, if they're using the jet version, you can track that because it has a thermal signature, the heat of the jet engine. It's actually easier for like an aircraft to identify and acquire the Shahed. And if they're on an inertial guidance, they're not being actively steered, which is subject to electric warfare. If they're just being put on a dead reckoning path, if you see them once, you can project where they're going and intercept them either with aircraft or with ground-based systems. But it's still significant, particularly if you've got, hundreds of them coming at you. You can overwhelm anybody with numbers.
Yeah, that's an important point you make, David, because is the Iranian strategy then to overwhelm Israel's multi-layered air defense system? And also by using other aerial assets like ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. So in effect, the attack itself is multi-layered as well.
Exactly. I think that, when you look at defense, you'd probably divide into one sector looking at low-level defenses, and that would be drones and cruise missiles, and then one looking at ballistic missiles. And obviously, you have different systems for acquiring and intercepting them. With ballistic missiles, you can do that with radar pretty effectively, and systems like Arrow is designed for ballistic missile defense. For the other air breathers, things operating closer to the ground, you need to have different systems, and you can actually effectively interdict them with, aircraft and other means. And of course, overlying all of this is electronic warfare. The accuracy is what makes these things really deadly. If they're going to be hyper accurate, that requires usually some sort of active guidance. And if you can jam the guidance system, which is usually GPS or the Russian version of GPS, probably in this case, then the missiles become inaccurate. Although that creates the possibility of Iran hitting a target that they may not want to hit and inadvertently causing civilian casualties that will necessitate an Israeli response. So it's a very, very dangerous game.
Yeah, let's just talk, if we can, David, about then the calibration of that response, because if the attack is just using drones, the Iranians must have calculated that as they're slower, most will be shot down. So does this then lessen the response threat level, as opposed to if ballistic and cruise missiles are used, then there could be a higher response level from the Israelis? And of course, the damage assessment will show how the Israelis respond to all of this.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's easier to acquire cruise missiles than drones at a short distance. Given the long range these are attacking, I mean, why would you give an enemy that much time to acquire the target and possibly defeat it? So it seems to indicate that this is sort of a pro forma thing, just to say that we've done it and hope that you don't cause enough damage that the cycle of escalation starts off. So that's there. But with cruise missiles, they move fast. They have more of a heat signature. They have more of a metal signature, but it's hard to acquire them with ground-based radar because of the curvature of the Earth and the low level they fly at. So that creates a greater potential. They also have bigger warheads. And of course, ballistic missiles, extremely expensive to defeat. The technology for defeating them is there, but if there are large numbers of them fired, particularly if they're fired at one point, then you can overwhelm defenses and cause some serious damage. And the warhead is capable of causing serious damage. So, when this is over, there'll be some analysis as to what was targeted and what was targeted with what weapons mix. And that really, I think, is how Israel will determine what Iran's intentions are and what their response needs to be.
Yeah, David, and just remind our viewers then, if you can, talk us through Israel's air defense capabilities. I mean, we hear so much about the Iron Dome system, but of course Israel has many more air defense systems and a multitude of electronic jamming measures as well, don't they?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think underlying it all, you'd have electronic warfare. And the purpose of electronic warfare is to defeat any kind of a guided system. Guided system requires some sort of electric link that goes from the aircraft, whether it's a drone or, a missile in some instances, back to somebody that can maneuver it. So if you disrupt that, then the missile is useless as a targeted weapon, although it can still cause damage. It can still land in an apartment building or something that was unintended. The second thing is using GPS, these satellite-aided navigation. It's relatively easy to jam or to block or to even spoof because it's such a weak signal. So that's your second thing. Then you're dealing with weapons that may be just fired on an inertial system where they're fired at a bearing and a distance and they don't have any active guidance. So those are not susceptible to electronic warfare. But the longer those weapons have to travel, the less accurate they become, the greater the chances of them going off course. Then you look at your interception. For ballistic missiles, things like Arrow and Aegis to the U.S. system that intercept at a high level, they acquire the target via radar and hit it at a high level. For cruise missiles and for drones, That's a little bit harder because radar usually can't acquire them, both because they're made out of fiberglass and because they operate lower to the ground. If you have some sort of airborne asset, you can acquire it, particularly if they're on a straight path over a long distance, as these Shaheeds are reported to be. And with the slow-moving ones, they're usually vulnerable to attack by aircraft. It's like hitting a Cessna aircraft with a bullet from a fighter jet. And of course, you can have ground-based short-range air defense systems. The Iron Dome is designed for use against relatively low-tech rockets and artillery rounds, coming less sophisticated things. They are effective against drones. And of course, ground-based machine guns, if you have adequate targeting, are effective against drones as well. That's probably more than you want. I apologize for.
No, that's absolutely fine, David. Always good to get your thoughts and your analysis on a night like tonight. And we'll obviously come back to you later on to give us your military analysis of this developing story. David Orosh, there, professor at the National Defense University in Washington. David, thank you. Before we move on, though, let's just recap something. Hamda Salut, our correspondent in Tel Aviv, was saying that there was a young 10-year-old boy who was injured by one of those drones in somewhere near the Negev desert. We understand he's now become the first casualty. So we'll obviously come back to that just a little bit later. But let's just talk to you now about this is what the airspace over the region looks like right now. You can clearly see the areas that planes are avoiding, those big holes in the middle of your screen. We know that Jordan has closed its airspace, Iraq has, Israel has. So those big blank areas in the middle are the airspaces that have been closed down. So that's what you're seeing on this screen from Flight Radar 24. Well, as we we're just saying there, Iraq is one of the countries that's closed its airspace for the next couple of days. Al Jazeera's Mohammed Jamjoom is there. He joins us from the capital, Baghdad. Mohammed, so Iraq announced its airspace is closed. What more is being said there by officials in Baghdad?
The only official statement we've gotten from any government entity thus far the last few hours, Darren, is from the Transport Ministry in alignment with the Civil Aviation Authority announcing the closure of the airspace until around 5:30 a.m. But they say that can be extended depending on the security situation going forward. Now, one of the key questions that people in Iraq have had the past few days, as it looked more and more as though Iran was going to be launching this retaliatory attack on Israel, was would this involve any Iranian proxy groups, any Iranian paramilitary groups, armed groups that are linked with Iran or backed by Iran? Of course, you have the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. That is an umbrella group comprising of many of these Iran-aligned and Iran-backed groups. Just yesterday, they issued a statement, this umbrella group, essentially saying that if Israel or the U.S. were to attack Iran or any Iran-allied countries here in the region, that there would be repercussions and that there would be retaliatory strikes from within those groups inside Iraq. Now, thus far, the last few hours, we have not heard any claims of responsibility from any of these groups including Kataib Hezbollah here in Iraq, part of that umbrella group, any of the other groups as well, as far as talking about having participated in Iran's strikes on Israel. We've seen one of those groups, which is Kataib Sayyid al-Shuhada. The head of that group posted on social media expressing support for Iran's attack on Israel, but nothing beyond that. We've not yet heard anything from any Iraqi government officials with regard to these attacks or what they expect to happen in the days to come. And this is all happening at a very interesting time because the Iraqi Prime Minister, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, left yesterday from Baghdad, heading to Washington, D.C., because he's supposed to meet with U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday to discuss not only bilateral relations between the two countries, but also trying to come up with a timeline to decrease U.S. military assets in Iraq and Syria have many times over the course of the last several months and the last several years come under attack by these Iran-linked groups in Iraq. And in fact, after October 7th, around 170 attacks from these groups towards U.S. military personnel had been happening. That all ended in late January. That's when there was an attack by Kataib Hezbollah, and that killed 3 U.S. troops at a base in Jordan. After that, you had retaliatory strikes by the U.S. on some of these groups, killing some of their leaders. And since about early February, there's been an unofficial ceasefire because there were pressure put on these groups to not try to widen this conflict. Unclear what's going to happen now going forward, but I will tell you that in the last half an hour, we are seeing reports emerging from northern Iraq in the Kurdish region that, in fact, the sirens in and around the U.S. consulate compound in Erbil, that they were activated for a short time. We're also seeing reports that there were loud booms heard in that area. And also there are reports that there was at least one of those Iranian drones headed towards Israel that was shot out of the sky, that was intercepted by coalition forces. So a lot to take in right now, a lot to try to piece together. We are reaching out to Iraqi government officials. We are reaching out to Kurdish officials. So far, nobody's responding as to what exactly is going on. It's a very tense situation, but at the moment, not a lot as far as what we're hearing from any officials here in Iraq, even though this is a moment of great tension and a lot of confusion about what will happen here in the days to come.
Yeah, Mohammed, as you say, the timing of this is really significant because of the Iraqi Prime Minister's trip to Washington to meet President Biden and to meet officials there. You were talking to us earlier about the risk to U.S. troops and U.S. assets, and there have been attacks on them in Iraq for as long as we can remember. What is the risk now, given the Iranian retaliation against Israel?